She almost didn't go. She stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, fixing her hair, then undoing it, then fixing it again, not because she was excited, but because she was annoyed. A blind date, at her age. It felt silly. Her cousin had begged her for weeks, saying the man was decent, respectful, and serious about life. Those words didn't excite her at all. Decent usually meant boring. Serious usually meant awkward. Still, she agreed, partly to stop the constant messages, and partly because she was tired of everyone saying she was too picky. She told herself it would be quick. Coffee, polite smiles, an excuse, and home. The cafe was small and quiet, the kind of place people want to work on laptops or read alone. Soft music played in the background. She scanned the room as she walked in, looking for someone who looked confident, well-dressed, maybe already standing up to greet her. Then she saw him. He was sitting near the window, hands folded around a simple coffee cup. No phone in his hand, no nervous tapping. He wore plain clothes, clean but nothing special. His posture was straight, but relaxed. He didn't rush to stand up when he noticed her. He just looked up and gave a small, polite smile. Her heart sank. This was it. She forced a smile and walked over. He stood up then, not hurried, not stiff, and pulled out the chair for her. That gesture surprised her for a second, but she brushed it off and sat down. They exchanged greetings. His voice was calm and steady, not loud, not trying to impress. He asked how her day was, listened when she answered, and nodded thoughtfully. No jokes, no flashy stories, no attempts to charm. Inside, she was already checking out. She asked what he did for work. He answered simply, no bragging, no details that sounded important. She waited for more, but he stopped talking when he finished his sentence, as if that was enough. She filled the silence with questions that felt more like tests. Where do you live? What do you do on weekends? Do you like traveling? His answers were honest, short, and plain. He spoke like someone who didn't feel the need to sell himself. To her, it felt like a waste of time. She had dated men who talked big, who showed confidence, who knew how to keep a conversation exciting. This man wasn't doing any of that. He wasn't nervous, but he wasn't trying either. It felt like sitting across from someone who didn't care what she thought. That bothered her more than she expected. She checked her watch. Not subtly. He noticed, of course, but didn't comment. He just took a slow sip of his coffee. The silence stretched again. She laughed lightly, not because something was funny, but because she wanted to break the moment. I'm sorry, she said, shaking her head. This is just not what I expected. He looked at her, still calm. That happens sometimes, he said. That was it. No defense. No question. No attempt to keep her there. Something in her snapped. She pushed her chair back and stood up. I don't think this is going to work, she said, smiling in a way that wasn't kind. Good luck, though. A few people nearby glanced over. She didn't care. She let out a small laugh as she picked up her bag. Not loud, but enough to feel sharp. He stood as well, nodding once. I hope you have a good day, he said. No anger, no embarrassment, just that same steady tone. That made her laugh again, this time under her breath, as she turned and walked toward the door. In her mind, the story was already finished. Another blind date disaster. Another example of why she hated setups. She stepped outside into the afternoon air, still smiling to herself. Then she stopped. A familiar voice called her name. She turned and saw her father standing a few steps away. He looked surprised to see her there, but also curious. He asked what she was doing at the cafe. She waved it off. Just a blind date, she said, rolling her eyes. Total waste of time. Her father smiled slightly, then glanced past her through the cafe window. His smile disappeared. His body changed in an instant. His shoulders straightened. His face grew serious, focused, almost tense. She noticed it right away. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer. He stared through the glass, eyes fixed on one person. The man she had just walked away from. The same man now sitting back down at the table, quietly finishing his coffee alone. Her father took a step forward, then another. She felt a strange knot form in her stomach. Dad, she said again. He didn't look at her. Without another word, He walked toward the cafe entrance. She followed, confused and suddenly nervous, her earlier laughter gone. As they entered, the soft music and low chatter filled the room again. The man by the window looked up, surprised to see them. Her father stopped in front of his table. He stood tall. Then, without hesitation, he raised his hand and gave a firm, respectful salute. The cafe went quiet, and she realized, far too late, that she had just laughed at someone she never truly saw. The silence felt heavy. Every sound in the cafe seemed to fade after her father raised his hand. Even the coffee machine behind the counter stopped hissing, as if it knew something important had just happened. A few people stared openly now. Others pretended not to look, but their heads were tilted just enough to listen. The man by the window stood up slowly. He did not return the salute right away. He looked uncomfortable, almost embarrassed. His eyes flicked briefly toward her, then back to her father. After a second, he gave a small nod and raised his hand, returning the salute with quiet precision. Her breath caught in her throat. She had seen her father salute before, but only in very specific moments. Funerals, official ceremonies, times that carried weight. He never did it casually, never in public places like this. "Sir," her father said, his voice firm but full of respect. The man lowered his hand. "You don't need to do that here," he said softly. "I do," her father replied. The word sent a chill through her. She stood frozen beside them, feeling suddenly out of place. A few minutes ago, she had walked out laughing. Now she felt like a child who had broken something important and didn't know how to fix it. Her father turned slightly and finally noticed her expression. Confusion, shock, a growing sense of dread. "Do you know who this is?" her father asked her. She shook her head slowly. The man looked down at the table. "It's not necessary," he said. Her father ignored him. "This man," he said, "once stood between me and something that would have ended my life." The cafe was completely silent now. She felt her face burn. Her father pulled out the chair across from the man and sat down without being invited. He gestured for her to sit as well. She hesitated, then did, her movement stiff and unsure. "He doesn't talk about it," her father continued. "He never has. But I will." The man shifted uncomfortably. "Please," he said again, quieter this time. Her father's eyes softened. "You taught me that sometimes telling the truth matters more than comfort." He turned back to her. "Years ago," he said, "I was part of a team sent somewhere we shouldn't have been. Things went wrong fast. Orders stopped making sense. People panicked." She listened, her heart pounding. This man was in charge, her father said, not because he wanted power, because when everyone else froze, he didn't. The man stared out the window, now jaw tight. "There was a moment," her father continued, "when everything depended on one decision, one wrong move, and none of us would have walked out." Her father paused. "He chose to stay behind," he said, "so the rest of us could get out." Her chest tightened. She looked at the man again, really looked at him this time. The lines on his face, the calm in his eyes, the way he sat like someone who had learned patience the hard way. "You never told me this," she said quietly. Her father nodded. "Because he asked me not to." The man finally spoke. "It was my job." "That's what you always say," her father replied, as if it was nothing. She swallowed. Just minutes ago, she had judged him by his clothes, by his silence, by the fact that he didn't try to impress her. And now she understood. He didn't need to. A server approached the table carefully. "Would you like anything?" she asked, clearly unsure she was interrupting. The man shook his head. "No, thank you." Her father ordered another coffee. She sat there, hands clenched in her lap, feeling smaller with every second. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice barely steady. "I didn't know." The man looked at her. There was no anger there, no judgment. "You weren't supposed to," he said. That somehow made it worse. "I shouldn't have laughed," she said. He considered her words, then nodded once. People see what they expect to see. Her father leaned back in his chair. "That's exactly why I wanted you to meet him," he said. She turned to him sharply. "You set this up?" He nodded. Not to test you, to show you something. She felt a rush of emotion, embarrassment, regret, curiosity. You always tell me you want someone real, her father continued. Someone steady, someone you can trust when life isn't perfect. She looked down. This is what that looks like, he said. The man shifted again. I never agreed to be a lesson. Her father smiled faintly. You were never trying to be. Another silence fell. Different this time. Less awkward. More thoughtful. She took a deep breath. Can I ask you something? She asked the man. He nodded. Why didn't you say anything when I stood up? He answered without hesitation. Because you were honest. And because if someone doesn't want to be there, they shouldn't feel trapped. Her throat tightened. She realized that his quiet wasn't weakness. It was control. The server returned with the coffee. The cafe slowly came back to life around them, though the people nearby still stole glances. Her father stood up. I should go, he said. I've already said more than I should have. He looked at the man. Thank you. Again. The man stood and nodded. Her father turned to her. Stay, he said gently, and listen more than you speak. Then he left. She and the man sat there alone. She didn't laugh this time. She didn't check her watch. For the first time since walking in, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She sat quietly, staring at the table. She could feel her cheeks still warm with embarrassment, but that feeling was slowly turning into something heavier. Curiosity, confusion, a growing awareness that she had been wrong to judge so quickly. The man took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down carefully. His movements were calm, deliberate, and respectful of the quiet moment they were sharing. He didn't try to fill the silence, didn't make small talk. He just waited, and that made her feel the weight of her own thoughts even more. Can I ask you about what my father said? She finally whispered, almost afraid of breaking the fragile calm. He nodded. Of course. Her fingers twisted in her lap. He said you saved him, saved people during something dangerous. I don't understand. How? He leaned back slightly, his eyes distant for a moment. It was a mission, he said simply. Things went wrong very fast. Lives were at stake. Decisions had to be made in seconds. She listened, her mind racing. She imagined chaos, danger, fear. The idea that someone could stay calm in that situation seemed impossible. I don't talk about it, he said, almost apologetically. Not because it wasn't important. Because talking doesn't change what happened. Actions do. Her head nodded slowly, trying to absorb everything. She thought of the judgment she had passed on him only minutes ago. She had laughed and walked away, thinking he was unremarkable, unexciting, plain. And yet here he was, someone who had carried courage in silence, someone who had faced situations she could barely imagine. Her hands unclenched slightly. She felt a strange mixture of awe and shame. I shouldn't have laughed, she admitted, her voice barely above the quiet hum of the cafe. He gave a faint smile, almost invisible. People see what they are ready to see, he said. It's easy to judge without knowing the whole story. She swallowed, feeling the truth in his words. Her father had tried to teach her that lesson before, but she had never understood it like this. Seeing it unfold before her, realizing the depth of someone's character behind a quiet face, changed everything. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Real strength often looks ordinary. Now, she understood what he meant. She had walked out on someone whose life had shaped others, whose courage had been quiet but immense, and she had missed it completely. You were calm, she said hesitantly. Even when my father saluted you, you didn't react. You didn't try to show off or tell me your story. He shrugged slightly. It's not about showing off. I didn't do what I did for recognition. I did it because it was necessary. The words settled in her chest like a weight she hadn't known was there. She thought of how often people talked about bravery, about courage, about being impressive, and she realized that true bravery didn't announce itself. It didn't need applause or laughter. It didn't need her to see it at all. I've never met someone like you, she said quietly, her eyes meeting his for the first time without judgment. I didn't know people like that still exist. He looked at her, and she noticed a softness in his expression that hadn't been there before. They do, he said simply, but they don't always seek attention. She nodded slowly. I get it now, she admitted. I really get it. I judge you too quickly. I laugh when I should have listened. He remained silent for a moment, then nodded once. It's all right, he said. You didn't know. Most people don't. Her heart eased slightly. She felt relief, but also a deep, humbling respect. She thought about her father again, how much he respected this man, how his life had been influenced by him, and now she saw it herself. Why didn't you tell anyone? She asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. He looked away, his gaze distant. Because it wasn't about me, lives were at stake. Talking about it doesn't change anything. Actions do. That's what matters. She leaned back slightly, processing the weight of his words. She felt small in a way that wasn't unpleasant. It was a recognition that she had been blind, that she had judged too quickly, and it was a lesson she would never forget. The cafe around them slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but she barely noticed. Other customers moved about. Servers bustled, soft music played. All of it seemed muted compared to the moment she was living. I have to ask, she said softly, why my father respects you so much. He gave a small, almost reluctant smile. He knows the truth. He knows what really happened. That's all that matters. If he respects me, it's because of the choices I made when it counted, not because of anything I said or showed. She nodded again, feeling a mixture of humility and awe. It was difficult to believe that someone so ordinary in appearance could carry such extraordinary weight in their actions. The contrast struck her hard. She realized how often she had looked at the world upside down, valuing flash and confidence over substance. Her father had wanted her to meet this man for a reason. She understood now. It wasn't about a blind date. It was about respect, about character, about seeing people for who they truly were. Can I start over? She asked, almost whispering. Not as a date, not as something awkward, just as people talking. He looked at her, measuring her sincerity. Then he nodded slowly. Yes, that would be fine. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. She took a deep breath. This time, there would be no judgment, no laughter, no need to impress or to prove anything. Just conversation, just listening. She felt the weight of the lesson settle in her chest. She had walked into a blind date, expecting disappointment and entertainment. Instead, she had been shown courage, humility, and strength that she could never have imagined, and it had changed her, quietly, profoundly. They began talking, carefully at first, both aware of the fragility of the moment. He spoke softly about life, about simple choices, about the things that mattered most. She listened, asking questions that showed genuine interest, not about money, not about status, not about impressing anyone, just about life, choices, and the people who shape it. Minutes turned into an hour, without either noticing. The earlier tension, the embarrassment, and the laughter that had once escaped her faded into understanding. She realized that some people don't need to talk loudly to leave a mark. Some lessons are taught quietly, in the presence of someone who simply lives them every day. By the time they stood to leave, the world outside seemed different. She looked at the man with new eyes, seeing not just the quiet figure who had sat across from her, but the person who carried integrity, courage, and humility in every gesture. She glanced briefly toward the door, thinking of her father. He had left without saying much, trusting that she would understand. Now she did. She felt gratitude for her father, for the man, for the lesson she had almost missed. And she knew this was not a moment she would forget. They sat back down after the initial tension faded, each taking a moment to breathe. The cafe felt warmer now, though the sun had not changed, and the faint smell of coffee and pastries mingled with a silence that was no longer heavy, but thoughtful. She felt a shift inside herself, a subtle realization that this meeting was more than just a random blind date. It was a lesson. He looked at her again, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. You asked to start over, he said quietly. So let's do that. She nodded. Her previous embarrassment had softened into humility, mixed with curiosity. She wanted to understand him, not judge him. She wanted to see the man behind the quiet calm, the one who had carried more than most people ever would. I want no more, she said slowly. Not about impressing me, not about telling a story to sound important, Just about life, about what matters. He nodded. I can do that, but I must warn you, it won't be exciting in the usual sense. There will be no dramatic rescues or hero stories. Only what I have learned and how I live. She smiled faintly. That was exactly what she wanted. She leaned forward slightly, eager to listen. He spoke with care, each word chosen deliberately, as if shaping it for the listener, yet not altering the truth. He talked about discipline, about calmness in difficult moments, and about the quiet strength that comes from responsibility. His voice was steady, and she found herself drawn into every word. I've learned, he said, that real courage doesn't need applause. It doesn't need recognition. It is often invisible. It is present in the choices people make when no one is watching, when no one knows, when it matters the most. She felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. The things her father had told her, the moments she had laughed and judged, all seemed small in comparison. She thought how easily people, including herself, valued appearances over substance, and she realized she had missed something vital. Why are you so calm? She asked. Even when my father saluted you, you didn't seem affected. He glanced at her, his eyes steady. I've faced moments where panic doesn't help, where fear won't change the outcome. You learn that control, calmness, and clarity are more powerful than emotion. That is what helps you protect others and yourself. Not showing off, not reacting loudly, just being present, thinking clearly, and acting when it is necessary. She nodded slowly, letting the idea sink in. She thought about all the times she had judged him in seconds, laughed without reason, dismissed him for his ordinary appearance. Now, she felt the sting of regret, but it was accompanied by a growing respect, deep and silent. You make it sound simple, she said softly, but I know it isn't. He smiled faintly. It never is. It takes practice, experience, and sometimes a lot of mistakes to learn to act with composure. But it is worth it, because when things truly matter, you can rely on yourself, and those around you can rely on you too. She felt a quiet admiration she had never expected. The man she had dismissed as plain, unremarkable, and awkward had revealed a depth she could barely comprehend. Every gesture, every calm response, was a result of years of facing real challenges, of making choices that mattered. She thought of her father again and how he had respected him silently all these years. The conversation continued. She asked questions, not to trap him, but to understand. He answered with honesty and humility, never exaggerating, never seeking approval. She learned about patience, about quiet service, about the importance of integrity in every small decision. The more he spoke, the more she realized that life's true lessons often come without fanfare, without recognition, and without drama. Your father respects you because he knows the truth, she said quietly. He knows who you are. And now I do too. I wish I had understood sooner. He nodded. Understanding takes time. And sometimes it takes seeing someone act, not just hearing about them. That is how lessons are learned best. She leaned back slightly, reflecting. She thought about all the blind dates she had attended, the judgments she had made, the laughs she had shared at the expense of others' dignity. This was different. This was real, and it had changed her. He glanced at the window, as if watching the world outside, though he remained seated. People often look for excitement and drama, he said. They forget that life's most important moments are quiet. They are in decisions, in responsibility, in being there when it matters. That is true strength. She nodded. The lesson was sinking in. She felt humbled, but also inspired. She wanted to be more like that, more aware, more present, more considerate. She wanted to look at people differently, to listen before judging, to respect what she didn't immediately understand. Time passed without them noticing. The cafe continued its rhythm, servers moving about, customers chatting, coffee machines hissing. Yet their conversation seemed insulated from it all. Nothing else mattered in that moment. She felt a sense of calm, of clarity, that she hadn't expected when she had walked in with her dismissive laughter. I feel like I've learned more today than I ever expected from a blind date, she said softly, smiling, but not the kind of smile she had worn when walking out. This was different, genuine, respectful. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Perhaps that is the best kind of meeting, he said. When people learn and not just judge. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a new understanding. I won't forget this, she said quietly. I promise. He remained silent, but there was a slight smile in his eyes. It was enough. Eventually, the conversation wound down. She realized that what had started as an awkward, disappointing blind date had become one of the most meaningful experiences of her life. The laughter, the judgment, the awkwardness, all of it faded into memory, replaced by something more substantial. She felt grateful for her father, who had arranged a meeting not to impress her, but to teach her a lesson about respect and character. She felt grateful for the man, who had remained calm and dignified throughout, never seeking recognition, only showing what true courage and integrity looked like. As they prepared to leave, she felt a quiet determination. She would carry this lesson with her. She would remember to look deeper, to listen before judging, to value substance over appearance. And perhaps most importantly, she would remember that real strength often looks ordinary. They walked out of the cafe together, the afternoon sunlight warming the street outside. The world seemed a little different now, more vivid, more meaningful. She glanced at him, this quiet, unassuming man who had taught her so much without raising his voice or demanding attention. She felt respect, humility, and a sense of possibility. She knew that whatever happened next, this day would stay with her forever. It had changed the way she saw people, life, and herself. And as they walked side by side, she realized that sometimes the most important lessons come from the quietest, most unassuming places. The sunlight outside felt warmer now, softer somehow, as if it had shifted to match her mood. She walked alongside him, still a little nervous, but not in the same way as before. Earlier, she had laughed, dismissed him, and felt superiority. Now, she felt respect, humility, and a quiet curiosity that was entirely different. She realized that first impressions could be wrong, and sometimes profoundly so. They walked in silence for a few steps, each lost in thought, letting the world around them continue, without intrusion. The streets were busy, but she hardly noticed. Her focus was on him, and on the conversation they were about to continue, the one they had started inside the cafe. It felt like a second chance, not just at the blind date, but at understanding what mattered in life. Can I ask you more? She said after a while. Her voice was soft, careful, almost tentative. He looked at her and nodded. Of course. She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. I want to understand how you keep calm in everything. Even when my father saluted you. Even when you knew everyone was watching. How do you do it? He looked out at the street for a moment, then back at her. I've had to face situations where panic or anger won't solve anything. Lives, sometimes, depend on a single clear decision. When I learned that, I realized that calmness and careful thought are more powerful than emotion. They allow you to act, to protect, to guide, instead of reacting blindly. She nodded, absorbing each word. It wasn't a story of action, adventure, or excitement. It was about choice, responsibility, quiet strength. She thought of her father again, the pride in his eyes and the respect he had carried silently for this man for years. She understood now. She had laughed too soon. She had judged wrongly. And she had learned a lesson that she would carry forever. I can't imagine facing something like that, she admitted. It must be terrifying. He shook his head slightly. Not terrifying necessary. Fear is useless if it prevents you from acting. You accept what must be done and do it. Sometimes that's all there is. She walked on, letting the words sink in. It felt heavy yet freeing. She thought of her own life, the small dramas she had focused on, the judgment she had passed on others, and how trivial it all seemed in comparison. The world felt wider now, more real, more significant. She had underestimated him, and she had underestimated the quiet power in ordinary appearances. Your father arranged this, she said softly. Not for me to be impressed, but to teach me something. He nodded slightly, his calm demeanor unchanged. Sometimes people need to see examples, not hear them. It's easier to understand when you witness character in action. She reflected on that. She had witnessed it now, more clearly than ever. She had laughed, walked away, and then watched as he carried himself with dignity, humility, and strength. She understood why her father had wanted her to meet him, why he had silently respected him all these years. They walked through a quieter street now, away from the busy cafe. She felt the lessons settling in. Respect was earned in silence, in actions, in the choices that mattered when no one was looking. Courage didn't always announce itself, and sometimes the most extraordinary people appeared ordinary. She had learned something essential today, something she would never forget. "I want to say thank you," she said finally. "Not for the date, not for meeting me, but for teaching me this lesson. I won't forget it." He gave a small, modest nod. "You don't need to thank me. You were willing to listen, willing to learn. That is enough." She smiled, genuinely this time, not in judgment or amusement, but in understanding. There was no rush to impress, no awkwardness, no need for validation. The conversation, the moment, and the lesson itself were enough. They stopped at a small park bench, shaded by a tree. She sat down, and he joined her a respectful distance away. The world continued around them. Children laughing, a dog barking, people walking by. But the space between them felt contained, focused, meaningful. "I'm glad I stayed," she said quietly. "I almost didn't. I almost walked away and missed all of this." He looked at her with a faint, approving smile. Sometimes the hardest part is choosing to stay and see. People often leave too soon, make judgments too fast, and never realize the depth around them. She nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in her chest. She thought of her own life, how many times she had done exactly that, and she knew that this day would change her, the way she looked at people, the way she valued what mattered most. "You've changed the way I see things," she admitted, "and I hope I can carry that forward, not just with you, but with everyone." He nodded, a quiet approval in his eyes. That is all anyone can hope for. Learning, growing, understanding. Actions speak louder than words. Respect is given where it is due, not demanded. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the people pass. She felt a calmness she hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude, respect, humility, understanding, all mingled together, creating a profound sense of clarity. "I feel lucky," she said after a pause, "to have met you, to have understood." He looked at her, steady, calm, and unassuming. "Perhaps, but it is also your choice to learn and see. That is what makes the difference." She nodded, feeling a deep connection not just to him, but to the lesson her father had orchestrated so carefully. She understood why he had arranged a meeting, why he had wanted her to see someone whose courage and character were quiet, yet profound. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the street. She realized it was time to go. She stood, feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones, not as a burden, but as a gift, a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. "Thank you," she said again softly, sincerely, "for everything." He nodded. "Take care. Remember what you've learned. Actions, integrity, respect, those are what matter." She smiled one last time and walked away, feeling a new perspective in her heart. The blind date that had started with laughter and judgment had ended with understanding and growth. She felt changed, enlightened, and grateful. As she walked down the street, she looked back once, seeing him standing there quietly, a figure of calm, humility, and strength. She realized she had witnessed something extraordinary, something that few people ever see. And she knew that this day, this meeting, and this lesson would stay with her forever. She carried it in her chest, in the way she held herself, in the way she would treat others, in the way she would choose to see the world. She had laughed and walked away too soon, but she had returned, stayed, and learned. And that was the most important lesson of all.